you scoot a little bit back? I'm sorry, could you scoot back a little? I'm sorry. Not a screw top. I thought this would be a screw top. I was hoping it would be a screw top. Fuck me. Hold on. Hello. My name is Dan Crabmeats. And you may know me as the guy who has done a lot of long-winded Magnus Archive content. And that will continue to be the case, do not worry. But for today, I've had a video idea stuck in my head for a long time, and I'm gonna finally do it and just get it out of the way. Yes, it's about Jennifer's body. I'm sure you can read the title. Why this movie, right? I'm a bit late to its 2009 initial release, and I'm also late to that period in 2018, 2019 when everyone on the internet collectively realized this movie slaps. The funny or stupid story about that is I watched a CinemaSins about it. Part 1, the inciting incident. Okay, let me be more clear here. I watched 2 CinemaSins videos about it. I remember this distinctly because it was pre-quarantine, and I was watching YouTube with a group of homosexuals, like we do. And this video came up on the queue, and it was the CinemaSins for Jennifer's body. And this being a room full of homosexuals, we naturally heckled this man heckling this movie, as a lot of the sins he gave it were just really out of touch. I remember specifically there was one scene where one of the characters gets a free drink by flashing the bartender, who happened to be a woman. And the sin that he gave it was like, if that woman wanted to see under a girl's shirt, why couldn't she just go to the mirror and do that? Like, I don't think Jennifer would get a free drink out of that. We're just at home just like, who's gonna tell him? Now, why this stuck in my head is that he re-released the video, I think, a couple of months later, and notably that sin was gone. Instead, it was, how did she figure out that bartender's preferences so fast? And that was the sin. Like, there was a lot of updates to the sin that were just like a little bit, like 20% more woke, which just to me made it very clear that, one, this guy was clearly bullied by a whole bunch of queer people in the comments until he changed it, but two, he didn't really know what he had done wrong, but he knew that he was in trouble. Just a lot of surface level changes, if you feel me. But also, quarantine was long and difficult, so there is a chance that I just fully addued myself with my friend as we're rewatching this old video. So if you know what I'm talking about and you want to like reassure me that I'm not crazy, comment, I guess. And if you have no idea what I'm talking about and you think maybe I dipped into the Berenstein universe for a second, also tell me that. I want to know. It ultimately really doesn't have a lot of bearing on this video, whether or not he changed it or not, because I'll be talking about the current version of the video, which is still available to view on their YouTube channel. Presumably. I haven't revisited it after I collected the points that I needed to talk about, which, let's get into that, shall we? Now, this man's inability to get the movie definitely sparked my first script, my first draft at this video essay. It was only like halfway through writing the script, though, that it kind of hit me like, why the fuck do I care what this random man has to say? Like, I don't watch this guy's stuff, not that I'm some like enlightened consumer, but I have my own garbage. He's not my bag. Like, it was kind of a weird accident I even saw this stuff to begin with. Why would I waste my time trying to combat his point of view? And that's when it occurred to me. My reaction to the video had nothing to do with those men. It had everything to do with what their comments meant to me. I was not actually interacting with the creators of CinemaSins, whose names are so relevant to me that I actually refuse to look them up for part of this video, but with a selection of traits that their Jennifer's Body video had revealed to me. To clarify, I am not remotely interested in revealing to you some hidden monster at CinemaSins LLC. I'm not qualified or remotely interested in trying to figure out the moral or ethical character of these men based on the entertainment they produce for the internet. I would, however, very much like to dissect the hateful chimera that was birthed as a result of their thoughtless media commentary. And to illustrate what I mean, I hope you will come with me on this rambling journey that I will tenuously call a video essay. Part 2. Genre and gender. The horror genre has a pretty interesting history when it comes to dealing with gender. Although arguably the first proper horror novel, Frankenstein, was written by a woman, and obviously women storytellers have been present throughout history, to newcomers, the horror genre may seem male-dominated, which, in a lot of respects, especially in cinema, it has been. This is something that is very visible in the casual misogyny that is present throughout many older horror films. Adding on to that, I'm sure many of you are familiar with the concept of the final girl. Now, this may seem like a counterpoint, like, aha, the final one who can escape a slasher is a woman. How empowering. However, the slasher genre initially functioned very similar to old-fashioned morality tales, wherein the person who escapes their situation is they who do not indulge. The archetypical final girl is she who does not indulge in drugs, in drinking, certainly not in sex, whereas the women who die are those who indulge in all of those things. The morality was very simple. It was black and white, right and wrong, Madonna and whore. That's not my words. That's Sigmund Freud used those terms to discuss a complex that he noticed within some men that seemingly prevented them from seeing women outside of a binary. On one side, there are women that men respect so much that they could never have sex with them, the Madonna. And on the other side, we have women that men desire so much that they feel incapable of respecting. This self-indulgent, largely unthoughtful, and uncurious male gaze definitely dominated horror cinema throughout the 60s through the 80s, just perforated with this kind of feminine representation. That doesn't mean that there weren't powerful exceptions to the rule, but they were exceptions. However, as is the nature of any genre, these tropes were iterated upon so many times in so many ways that for there to be any innovation within the genre, there needed to be some subversion, which absolutely began to happen. The edgy, transgressive humor of the late 90s and early 2000s may not have been as focused as the horror that we've been seeing since the 2010s, but you can't deny that it was intent on pushing boundaries, sometimes in places where no one really wanted. Horror in the 2000s has a very distinct flavor. Even if you haven't really cracked into movies of that era, if you were a kid who remembered going inside video stores physically and like peering down the horror aisle, I'm sure you have an idea of what I mean. I remember being a kid and like staring down that aisle and just being baffled because what could happen in a movie that justifies like these kinds of covers? Like what the hell? What's going on? They exuded this sort of dangerous sexual energy that always entranced and mystified me as a child. I actually ended up watching a whole lot of these in high school whenever Netflix started being an online thing. They just had like a lot of really shitty horror movies in the early days. Like a lot of Saw knockoffs, a lot of really cheap survival horror, a lot of home invasion type stuff. There's a gnat in here again. At least he died drunk. There's a lot of gore, a lot of suffering, a lot of hopelessness. There's a certain bleakness to the extremis of this decade. The threat of hyperviolence was so omnipresent, and when it was enacted upon, it was so brutal. It was often so over the top that it ended up unintentionally going full circle and becoming comedic again, especially with the aid of those early 2000s tasty CGI. It makes me think about whenever the 3D craze hit, how it just started touching movies that it really shouldn't have ever impacted. Oh, and then there's the beauty when the 3D circle and the unnecessary CG gore circle intertwine, and that's... Sometimes the more audacious horror creators would try to go full circle on purpose. They would try to mesh slapstick style comedy with gratuitous violence and end up creating something called splatstick. I say audacious creators because obviously it takes a lot of conviction and self-confidence to be able to carry this kind of choice out. However, most often in films during this decade, the overwhelming feeling is that someone is trying to overwhelm your sense of decency, almost to the point of like a sort of sardonic numbness. Like there's a sort of a dark humor in how normal, how matter-of-fact this violence has become, but it's not like a fun humor. It's more like Shit, I'm glad that happened to them and not to me. That would suck. I'm not saying this to mean that there's no nuance in films of this time, but there's definitely this general disaffected attitude that sits on top of everything during this decade. This hopelessness in the face of a chaotically evil world is, in many ways, a reaction to the simple morality of the preceding generations. In this new era, violence is random, humans are all equipped with the capacity for great evil, and no amount of purity or piety can save you. We're questioning the things that we were told would keep us safe, and realizing that our heavenly papa upstairs was little more than a nightlight all along. You really get a sense of anger, alienation, betrayal in this decade, which coincides with the start of the internet age proper, when I think a lot of American eyes would start to open to the wider struggles of the global world. While there is this common motive of questioning the status quo, this doesn't mean that every film that came out from the 90s to early 2000s did a great job of pushing boundaries. And in fact, a lot of the stuff that was made was, yes, very cringy, very edgy, but there was also a lot of really poignant work that I think were only able to be produced in this new era. One of the taboos that horror makers wanted to tackle was the taboo of sexuality, closing the distance between metaphorical monsters, which represent our anxieties around sex, and replacing them with more transparent, more honest explorations of our fears. This is the media landscape that produced Jennifer's Body, a film which cares a lot about subverting your expectations around gender and genre. It was written by Diablo Cody, directed by Karen Kusama, and stars Megan Fox and Amanda Seyfried. Although its creators had expected the film to see success along the lines of Mean Girls, the film unfortunately flew under the radar for its initial release. Other YouTube creators have addressed this, but long story short, it was a combination of mismarketing and misogyny, as one would expect, I guess. Although unappreciated in its time, when the Me Too movement brought the stories of women into the foreground, many pieces of feminist history were re-examined as a result, and that includes Jennifer's Body. I think the rise in publicity for women's issues caused many to rethink their views, if only because now it was a bad look to be a misogynist. Here's a fun hypothetical. What happens if, say, you don't really examine your biases? What happens if you just sort of learn to keep reciting the buzzwords that you hear on the internet, and you don't take the time to really dig into your foundational ideas about femininity and womanhood? What happens? What do you think happens? Just something to think about. Fucking cats in my house. To explain what I mean, I will now summarize the events of this movie, highlighting details that I find worthwhile. And spoiler alert, there's a lot of them. I suppose a regular spoiler alert as well. I'm going to spoil the whole movie. Part 3. YouTube guy summarizes movie in case you haven't seen it, it's been a while, or you just want to listen to something while you do the dishes. We open at the end of the film, meeting Anita "Needy" Lesnicki. For reasons yet unknown to us, she's an inmate at a psychiatric juvenile detention center, a place Needy refers to as the Mental Olympics. We briefly see the bad conditions of the facility as Needy explains her new reputation as a kicker. When a seemingly well-intentioned nurse advises her to eat more at lunch, we see that her reputation is well earned. Several orderlies have to work together in order to restrain her, and she is then thrown into solitary confinement. Inside, a song begins to play that triggers an angry reaction from Needy and serves as our transition into the actions that lead us here. She introduces us to her tiny hometown, Devil's Kettle, a place named for its odd geological feature, a waterfall into a vortex with seemingly no exit. We then finally meet the titular Jennifer. We, like creepy Needy in the window, observe a sickly girl as she watches an 80s workout cassette in bed. Needy then takes us further back in time, to the version of Jennifer that she was infatuated with. Full stop, no retraction. Here's the gay pill, take it. Keep up, I will be citing my sources as I go along, you doubting Tom. We see a flag spinning, cheerleading Jennifer on the court, a wide-grinning Needy clapping enthusiastically in the crowd. This girl says to Needy, "You're totally lesbian gay." Needy says they're best friends. And, babe like Jennifer would associate with a dork like me. Okay, sweetheart. One fateful day, Jennifer stops at Needy's locker to inform her that she will be accompanying Jennifer to a rock show later that night. Needy begins to protest that she had plans with her boyfriend, but upon Jennifer's whining, she quickly drops these complaints and complies to Jennifer's demands. Jennifer, satisfied with having got her way, departs and tells Needy to wear something cute. Needy gets ready while the narration explains Jennifer's terminology. She should dress in a way that doesn't embarrass Jennifer while also not upstaging her. Her boyfriend, young Neil, remarks how he still finds her whorish getup unnecessarily revealing. Upon being kissed by his girlfriend, audacious and optimistic young Neil goes for the belt, only to be interrupted as Needy senses the presence of Jennifer downstairs. Young Neil admonishes his pagan girlfriend for his unnatural relationship with another woman, and Needy assures him that their relationship is very much a normal platonic one based off of shared interests. If you're counting, this is now 2 instances where someone has commented on how unnatural their relationship is. Downstairs, Jennifer openly delights at her ability to steal Needy away at the drop of a hat. Then the 2 girls take Jennifer's mom's car to the local grungy dive bar called Melody Lane. Inside, they run into Chris Pratt, who snatches a cigarette from Jennifer's fingers and admonishes the whore for defiling her decadent body with such a poison. Jennifer flirts back, which actively alarms Mr. Jurassic World Man. They then notice the band, Cold Shoulder, is setting up in the back. Chris Pratt, demonstrating a now familiar casual homophobia, remarks how the eyeliner-clad band resembles, quote, a bunch of fagos. This annoys Jennifer, who wishes that there were more artsy types in their hodunk small town. Jennifer drags Needy with her to meet the band, and along the way, they have this interesting interaction.
They're just boys, morsels. We have all the power. Don't you know that these things, these are like smart bombs, okay? You point them in the right direction, and shit gets real.
When they interact with the boys, Jennifer's demeanor changes subtly. Her quick wit is replaced with stammering and batted eyelashes as she stands in awe of the lead singer, Nikolai Wolf. When Jennifer leaves to buy the man a drink, Needy overhears 2 members of the band discussing whether or not they think Jennifer is a virgin. In an attempt to defend her best friend's honor, Needy tells them that Jennifer is a virgin. The bandmates exchange meaningful eye contact as she storms away. In spite of Needy's warnings, Jennifer and the lead singer take their respective shots, and then Jennifer and Needy find their way into the crowd, just as Cold Shoulder begins to perform. Through the Trees isn't a bad song, I guess, but in the context of this movie, it is fucking horrifying. We see Jennifer and Needy in the crowd. Jennifer reaches out, takes Needy's hand. Needy stares at Jennifer, face full of expectations, waiting for Jennifer to look back. But it's no use. Jennifer is locked onto the lead singer. Face betraying this realization, Needy pulls her hand away and looks away from Jennifer at last, just in time to see flames springing up from the band's electrical equipment. This fire quickly spreads and panic follows, people stampeding over one another to escape the heat and smoke. Needy has to drag a dazed Jennifer up and out the bathroom window to safety, where they can still hear and see the carnage caused by the fire. As Needy tries to get Jennifer to snap out of her stupor, the lead singer appears, calm and cocky, sipping something that he forces Jennifer to finish, saying it's to help her deal with her shock. Needy begs Jennifer to leave, as Jennifer is all but dragged away by Nikolai, and Jennifer's slurred responses of encouragement seem to actively deflate Needy. Still angry about Jennifer's mistreatment of her, but clearly able to sense that something is wrong, Needy watches from a distance as Jennifer is taken inside the band's creepy van. Upon returning home, Needy calls young Neil, who helpfully admonishes the whore Jennifer for being merely kidnapped on a night where far worse things have happened. Needy hears some sounds downstairs, which she investigates before ending the call. She continues hearing sounds, which she falls into the kitchen, where she finally meets Jennifer once again. Covered in blood and gore, utterly silent and wearing expressions like ill-fitting masks, Jennifer stares at Needy before going to rage her fridge. Needy begins to protest that her mom bought that chicken from Boston Market, and Jennifer howls like a demon in response and projectile vomits some interesting black substance before beginning to giggle monotonously. Needy, obviously freaked out by this, goes to help her friend calm down, taking her hand and quickly realizing that Jennifer had no pulse or warmth to her. This prompts a terrified Needy to make a break for it, where she is quickly halted by the now terrifying Jennifer, who holds her against the wall and asks her if she is scared. When Needy says yes, she is, Jennifer takes a contemplative taste of Needy's neck flesh before seeming to think better of it and making her escape. The next day at school, people are already talking about the incident at the dive bar. While Needy sits silently, we see what she's thinking about in the form of a flashback from when she and Jennifer were young.
What's wrong, Jennifer? Don't tell me not to shoot me a shot. I never tell you.
Jennifer interrupts Needy's reminiscing as she appears, looking perfectly normal. When Needy demands an answer for the strange events of the previous night, Jennifer pretends not to know what Needy is talking about. Worthy to mention, Needy is not gaslit, as she both remembers cleaning up the bile over the floor and even can still see the gunk in the crevices of her fingernails. When their teacher arrives and begins to talk about the weekend's tragedy, Jennifer behaves belligerently, much to the ire of Needy and the rest of the class. This is contrasted to the obvious numbness that Needy experiences, as well as the outright sobbing attacks from other students. Also worth mentioning, when Needy takes the leap of faith and shares her theories about what's been going on with young Neil, he admonishes the delusional puppet for speaking such lies in public. From here, we finally see how Jennifer sustains herself. In case you weren't aware before getting into this movie, she eats boys. Her first victim that we see, chronologically second victim, is Craig's best friend, Jonah. Craig was someone who had died during the fire. Jennifer lures him into the woods with a story about his dead friend, saying Craig always wanted the two of them to hook up. When Jennifer leads him through the trees and seduces him, animals begin to gather around the two, awaiting a feast. Jennifer reveals this fact shortly before digging in herself. We cut from here to a conversation between Needy and her mom, wherein Needy is assuring her mom that she can look out for herself. In response, her mom says, "One day you'll be crying out for me, but I won't be there." But from here, we are confronted by the opposite, a traumatic subversion, a mother crying out for her child who is no longer there. As the local dutiful cop promises to get the guy who did this, the heartbroken father, who is played by Bill Fagerbuck, who's the voice of Patrick Starr, by the way, yells into the wind that, "I'll cut off your nutsack and nail it to my door! Like one of those lion door knockers rich folks got! That will be your balls!" From here, we cut to Jennifer rinsing her ballless body in a lake, another subversion because no one assumes that a feminine presence is capable of this kind of brutality. We see the immediate effect of Jennifer's meal. In her own words, she's God. Needy tries and fails once again to get straight answers out of Jennifer before her boyfriend calls to ask for her company. Here, I won't mock him as he expresses genuine vulnerability, as he expresses his fears. See, young men, just like him, are dying all around him, and there's suddenly no guarantee that he won't join them. There is another fun little subversion where he's shaking and he pretends it's because of the cold, so Needy offers him her jacket. We hear once again, and I really hope you're getting as tired of it as I am. The reason for this is pretty horrifying. So after the tragedy, Low Shoulder, the band, ended up blowing up. They achieved fame due to their presence at the tragedy that took place in Devil's Kettle. Chillingly, we see candlelit vigils where grieving teenagers sing the anthem of the criminals who caused this tragedy without even realizing it. Following this, we learn that it is the 1-month anniversary from the fire, and we see that Jennifer is once again not looking so hot. She mumbles elusively that it must be wearing off. While she is talking to Needy in the hall, Needy's emo friend approaches to ask Jennifer out. She quickly turns him down, much to the confusion of Needy, who thinks he's actually pretty alright.
Colin's really nice. He's into maggot rock. He wears nail polish. My dick is bigger. Well, I think he's really cool.
Hearing this, Jennifer changes her mind, telling Colin to come to her house later that night. We cut from a scene of Needy and Chip flirting to them cuddling in Chip's house later that same night. Now, if you're expecting this movie to follow the typical Madonna horror binary, you might have been surprised when Needy is having sex. But as I keep saying, this movie wants to challenge these ideas. As Needy and Chip are having their cozy night in, we cut over to Colin, the emo boy from earlier, jamming out really excited on his way to go see Jennifer. It's honestly really sweet. However, when he arrives, he finds an abandoned house instead. Colin explores the house, eventually finding the location Jennifer has prepared for their date. There are many lit candles placed around the room, and a stereo plays Love You by Akon. Jennifer finally shows herself, silently examining Colin as he nervously asks about the empty house. Jennifer responds by saying, "This is our house, just for you and me. We can play mommy and daddy." Colin looks uneasy, asking if she even knows his last name. Jennifer assures him that she's been sending him signals all year. We then cut back and forth between Jennifer forcefully kissing Colin and Chip kissing Needy, contrasting the tones between the two scenes. Back to Jennifer, we see her cattily tormenting Colin as she seduces him, mocking him first for being afraid of mice, and then flashing him her demon eyes to startle him further. When he flinches, he cuts himself on a sharp bit of metal, and from here the violence begins to escalate as Jennifer finally reveals her murderous intent. She breaks his bones, throws him around impatiently, growling that she needs him scared. She needs him hopeless. Jennifer begins to devour Colin. Meanwhile, Needy is also not having a great time. She begins to see the ghosts of her dead friends in the corner of the room, crying and repeating hopeless. And then Needy finally gets the hell out of that house, nearly hitting a spooky Jennifer on the way home. When she does finally get home, she is once again alone, as her mother works night shifts. Needy heads upstairs to her room, where she slides into bed, only to be jump scared by Jennifer, who has somehow beat her home. Needy screams, understandably upset, so Jennifer immediately begins to downplay her reaction and tries to distract Needy by kissing her.
Somebody with that t-shirt.
Needy succumbs to her attraction to Jennifer for a moment, but before things can escalate, Needy snaps out of it, finally putting her foot down and demanding answers from Jennifer about what's been happening, and more specifically, what happened the night of the fire. Jennifer finally tells that story, resuming right where she and Needy were separated. As the band all stares silently at the dazed, drunk Jennifer, she looks around the inside of their van, spotting many satanic instruments. When she speaks, however, she doesn't address that, asking instead if the band were rapists. The band groans and rolls their eyes, outright saying this is why they hate girls. When they arrive at their destination, a cliff overlooking the Devil's Kettle waterfall, they drag out a screaming Jennifer and tie her down. She begs for her life, which makes the band uncomfortable with their next step. However, Nikolai Wolf scolds them, asking if they really want to work in some coffee shop forever. They proceed to perform a ritual, but they have to pause so that Nikolai can ask Jennifer's name. He hadn't even remembered her fucking name. In a brilliant moment of word association, upon hearing her name, Nikolai decides to burst out with Jenny by Timmy Two-Tone. His bandmates join in, and their haunting dissonance is interrupted only by Jennifer's screams as they stab her to death. They then throw the murder weapon into the waterfall, presumably aware of its reputation, before leaving Jennifer in the woods. Eventually, however, Jennifer wakes up. On her way back from the waterfall, she finds Ahmed, an Indian exchange student who had gotten lost after the tragedy, and verifies that nobody knows that he survived the fire before leading him into the woods. Or, through the trees, if you will. Jennifer explains to Needy that when she's full, she's invincible. She demonstrates this by harming herself and then showing how the wound quickly heals itself. Needy is disturbed by what she sees, and slowly begins to question Jennifer about her recent inhuman behavior. And what does she mean, full? Jennifer, put off by her accusatory tone, tells Needy that she's crazy and begins poking at her relationships in a thinly veiled threat. When Needy asks Jennifer to leave, she quickly changes tactics and asks if they can spend the night, so they can play mommy and daddy just like they used to. Needy is undeterred, demanding Jennifer leave, so she does, opening Needy's bedroom window and dropping out into the night. The next scene is Colin's funeral, where we see his emo friends crying over his casket as his family mourns.
I belong down there, in the darkness!
No, Kevin. Those are just his earthly remains. He's among the dark angels of the realm now. Fly, Colin. Fly to the firmament. Pretty sure my son wouldn't have liked being eaten by a fucking cannibal and buried before his 18th birthday. Wow, you must have known him so well.
Joe.
You can take your pain, and you can shove it up your asses, kids. I got the monopoly on pain.
I think it's worth noting here that they chose to spend time on this scene. They wanted to show children mourning and an adult stepping in to tell them that they're not allowed to grieve. I'm not going to deny that their behavior is like cringy or whatever, but they're kids and they're trying to come to terms with the fact that one of their best friends was murdered and cannibalized. And the line was, "I have the monopoly on pain." Just something to remember. Following this, Needy ventures into the cult section of her school's library to do some research, and learns Jennifer is, or has been, possessed by a succubus. Armed with this new knowledge, she goes to warn Chip that she fears the upcoming dance will provide Jennifer with an all-you-can-eat boy buffet. Predictably, Chip does not believe her, forcing Needy to realize that if anybody's gonna stop Jennifer, it's gotta be her. At this realization, Kiss with a Fist by Florence and the Machine starts playing. This music sets the scene for the montage of everyone getting ready for the dance. We see Needy's mother doing her hair and makeup, with the final look being uncharacteristically bold and bright red. This is a choice that stands out to me, given how often red is associated the harlot's color. blurring the lines about that binary yet again. We see Chip's mother offering her son pepper spray, something that I will admit I found funny as a teen. Like, haha, man get pink thing. Pink is for a woman. Therefore, he's being likened to a woman, which is lesser than. Laugh at him. But now I understand that this is a really layered choice. See, young Neil is a young lad who is endangered by his being a young lad, and he is being offered pepper spray, an item of defense, but it is specifically pink, so that we never forget that there is already a marketplace that is dependent on feminine people encountering violence on the regular. We see both halves of the couple taking pictures of their families, and then we see Jennifer, alone, sat in front of her vanity, upon which we can see a picture of her when she was alive. Needy arrives at the dance early, surveying the scene to find Jennifer. Unbeknownst to her, however, Jennifer is outside, intercepting Chip, who, in spite of the boy eating cannibal on the loose, has been allowed to walk to the dance alone. Jennifer asks if they could talk about Needy, saying she's worried for her friend, a line which succeeds in gaining Chip's trust for the moment. Jennifer, dressed in white, the color typically used to signify purity, tells Chip that Needy has been so down lately because she was cheating on Chip with Colin Gray. Tapping into his obvious insecurities, Jennifer is able to manipulate Chip into kissing her. Meanwhile, just as Low Shoulder has begun to play their surprise free show, Needy is unable to properly rage against the men who murdered her best friend, as through a sort of psychic link with Jennifer, she's able to feel that Jennifer is macking on her man. Whether this is telepathy or future sight or just plain old intuition, Needy heads back to Chip's house, where his mom answers the door with his sister in the background. Chip's mom tells Needy that Chip was on his way to the dance. Then their exchange is interrupted as she yells back at her daughter. Jennifer, by now, has lured Chip into an abandoned swimming pool. They sit together on the side of the pool, Jennifer attempting to seduce Chip once again. This time, however, Chip rejects her, and this sets Jennifer off. She shoves him off the side of the pool and leaps in after him, throwing him around until his yells attract Needy's attention. She busts into the abandoned pool. Unfortunately, it is too late. Jennifer has already taken a chunk out of Chip's neck, but then Needy finally chooses violence.
Saint Jude, patron saint of all causes, please give me the power to crush this bitch.
Chip quietly bleeds out while his girlfriend and her girlfriend duke it out in the water. When Jennifer vanishes under the surface, he tosses Needy his pepper spray, who promptly uses it on Jennifer when she resurfaces, and it does work. For a moment, before Jennifer begins to levitate.
She can fly.
She's just covering. It's not that impressive. But do you have to undermine everything that I do? You are such a player hater.
Then, in the best scene that I've ever seen, all of this tension finally bubbled up to the surface in the most 2000s way it possibly could have.
You're a jerk. Wow, nice insult, Hannah Montana. You got any more harsh days?
You know what? You were never a good friend.
Even when we were little, you used to steal my toys, you pour lemonade on my bed, and now I'm eating your boyfriend. See? At least I'm consistent.
Why'd you need him? Huh? You could have anybody that you want, Jennifer. So, why Chip? Is it just to take me off? Or is it because you're just really insecure?
I am not insecure, Needy. God, that's a joke. How could I ever be insecure? I was the snowflake queen.
Yeah. 2 years ago when you were socially relevant.
I am still socially relevant.
And when you didn't need laxatives to stay skinny.
I am going to eat your soul and shit it out.
You only murder boys.
I go both ways.
Ow.
Following this, Jennifer leaves via the window. Chip apologizes for not believing Needy sooner, and then delivers this final line.
I think I already died before you got here, but I woke up and I heard your voice.
Before passing away. Needy shrieks over his corpse, and then, with nothing left to lose, realizes what she must do. Returning home, she equips herself for demon hunting, and then heads to Jennifer's house. They have their final clash, which, once again, here.
You know what this is for? It's for cutting boxes.
Do you buy all your murder weapons at Home Depot?
God, you're butch. No. Your heart.
Following this, Jennifer's mom walks in and discovers Jennifer's body, resulting in Needy behind bars, right where we met her. Now back full circle, we see that the bite that Jennifer inflicted has healed, and that as a result, Needy now has some of Jennifer's power. She walks right out of the facility and finds a stream next to a road containing the balls that scientists dropped, as well as the knife that Low Shoulder had used to murder Jennifer. She takes it with her as she hitchhikes. When she finds a ride, the driver asks her where she's going, and she answers that there's a band that she wants to see, as a nearby sign confirms what we suspect. The end credits begin as paparazzi-style photos of Low Shoulder as they live at large, but halfway through, they become crime scene photos of the band's dead bodies. We learn about this final battle only through environmental storytelling, with the most crucial detail being where that knife ended up. The film ends with a hooded Needy leaving that hotel, mean mugging a security camera. Part 4. The things that the Sin Man said, and why they were wrong. Remember how I mentioned, like, oh, I'm not really interacting with CinemaSins, whoever the fuck those guys are. I'm interacting with, like, my ideas about them. To really drive that point home, I made him... I'm gonna call him Mr. Sin Man. I'm not good at making plushies, so what I did instead is I made an abomination. Yes, it's finally time for me to talk about some of the shitty sins given out to this movie. I've got 14 that I really want to just go off on for catharsis, frankly. I hope it's fun for you too, because I had a real spectacular time. And just a reminder, I'm addressing Mr. Sin Man here. Not the creators of CinemaSins, when I say the things that I'm about to say. Got this for $5.
The band seemed generally bemused about the giant fire in the bar. Did they start it? If so, why? If not, why are they completely unconcerned about themselves and their gear?
Yes, they started the fire. I don't know if the plot was too subtle for you, but these shitheads wanted to go to a hodunk, middle of nowhere, piece of shit town. They did the fire so that if anyone went missing, they could just be like, oh, they died as part of the fire. And then later on, when they became famous as a result of this tragedy, they went with it because they're opportunistic pieces of shit. I hope you never go into, like, investigative journalism or anything like that.
People are like, oh, look, they've cared for each other for so long and I'm all like, cute, she's kissing blood and loving it.
Oh my god, you're such a manic pixie dream boy. Like, you notice that? Like, the fact that their relationship doesn't have boundaries and so as a result it's become kind of toxic. Oh my gosh. It's a shame that the movie doesn't notice that. It's a shame that I don't address that more. God, I wish more boys were like you.
You know, if the fire were this dramatic, and losing 8 students and a teacher definitely would be, why didn't they close the school for the fucking day? I mean, that stuff happened mere hours ago.
Have we been living in the same America, Mr. Sinman? Because the one that I live in is, like, so worried about productivity and the illusion of normalcy that it does not give any of us the proper time after tragedies to cope. I make the point that I do think that this comedy horror goes a bit too far in some places, like it exaggerates in some places, but in this case I do think that they're trying to make a point about how inappropriate it is to expect these kids to be fine after such a world-shattering trauma like that. It's almost like these kids don't have anyone on their side supporting them in this strange new era. It's almost like...
Pop quiz. Which of these creatures would stick around for a fleshy snack after Jennifer kills her victim? Anyone who chooses the herbivore would be an idiot. But also correct, because fuck this movie.
First of all, you better have some goddamn respect for fucked up deer. Fucked up deer are a way to represent, like, oh, something's up with nature. That's number one. Number two, did you miss that this is a doe, a deer, a female deer, who is meant to mirror Jennifer herself, someone who is also feminine, and who is presumed to be prey, and therefore not a threat, not carnivorous? I mean, I guess in some ways I'm glad that you know at least, like, your 8th grade science, but you're wrong again. You're wrong again. Deer are opportunistic omnivores, you piece of shit.
This is basically confirming what happened last night, right? So this is backshadowing? My point is, what's the point?
Homie, the next shot is of a mom crying out for her son who's not there. It's a subversion. You might have caught that, but you only ever take your head out of your ass long enough to hear like, oh, a woman's talking, time to give it a send. Ding.
Hey, why doesn't the movie ever address Jennifer's feelings about the band that murders her? Throughout this scene, as the teacher is singing their praises, she looks like she's thinking about toast.
I'm not going to be funny about this one. I'm going to put a pin in this and I'm going to address it later because it deserves to be addressed.
Also, why is Jennifer into guys that Needy really likes? It's not like an essential feature of a succubus, right? And even if she's trying to break up relationships, there are plenty of others around.
Yeah, it's almost like Needy's nickname is a misnomer. It's almost like Jennifer is the real needy one in the relationship. It's almost like Jennifer will do anything to ensure that she has Needy's entire undivided attention. It's almost like Jennifer will attack and dissolve all of the relationships to make sure that Needy has no one but her. It's almost like reducing this movie to a by-the-book possession story is missing a lot of the aspects that make this a fun and horrifying story. I don't know.
Why does Needy feel a disturbance in the Force? I know she and Jen are good friends, but does she seriously know what's happening now?
So, if you want to take a literal path, it's been established in the text that Jennifer and Needy share an intimate, near psychic level bond with each other. Outside of that, there's still a reason for the sin that I would also like to put a pin in. I'd love it if you could learn a little bit about the Kuleshov effects before that discussion. Mr. Following Ideas has a really good video. It's bite-sized. I suggest you pay special attention if he talks about something being emotionally contiguous.
Also, Evil Dead poster in the background is extremely relevant to the movie, but is Needy the type of girl to have that shit on the walls of her bedroom? I think not.
Okay, so this one's less pressing, but Mr. Sinman, I would genuinely like to know what you think Needy is into. I have a feeling that you would say, like, clothing, schoolwork, chip. I guess it's not like a major plot point or anything, but it is like a recurring theme that Needy and Jennifer share these, like, dark, spooky, campy interests. Like, in this scene, Jennifer is literally wearing Needy's Evil Dead t-shirt, so I guess the data would suggest that, yes, Needy's a fan of Evil Dead. Fucking pay attention.
And yet, I decided to tell you this much later than I normally would have.
Add this to the discuss later column.
Sure, everything is laughs now, but half these motherfuckers were super hesitant about doing this shit about 2 seconds before.
Yeah, I agree. These guys are limp-dicked cowards who would rather literally sacrifice an innocent teenager to Satan than actually put in the effort that it would take for them to rise to popularity by their own merits. This movie likes to use comedy as a way to cut to the heart of things. So portraying them accurately as the little piss children that they are is a very strong choice. It's very hilarious, and it's also very accurate. In real life, people who behave like this are not badass. They are not anti-establishment heroes. They are a dime a dozen early 2000s indie punk band with an inflated sense of self-worth. So, I'm sorry that the murderers in this story aren't as cool as you wanted them to be, but I think that they're well depicted for what they are. Even with them being so goddamn goofy, they managed to be a horrifying presence throughout, so.
Yeesh. I mean, maybe if you get this upset putting on makeup, just don't wear it.
We'll circle back. We'll circle back to this one. But, dear God, if this is how you interact with anything, then life itself must feel like a goddamn puppet show to you all the time, Mr. Sinman.
Fantastic. So why haven't you murdered any girls yet?
I go both ways. uh, another pin for later, but here's a fun game for all of the LGBTQ pluses in the chat. Can you spot the fun irony in this frame? I feel like you'll be able to. You're very smart, folks.
Okay, no need to run and or call for any help then.
Let me ask you this, Mr. Sinman. When the genders are flipped, when it's the inverse gender situation, do you question that as intently when Mr. Hero Action Man and Mr. Evil are fighting each other, and Mr. Evil kidnaps Miss Lady, Mr. Hero's girlfriend? You would tell women to be grateful that Miss Lady had even a token effort in overcoming Mr. Evil before she died. You would likely understand in that situation that Miss Lady wasn't really a person, she was the stakes. And when she dies, it's not a tragedy independent of its effect on Mr. Hero. Rather, she's the inciting incident that permits Mr. Hero to step up his combat, step up his violence, and finally bring down Mr. Evil for good. That's the beauty of this line. It's so fully aware of what it's doing, and so cheeky about it. Like, yeah, Chip basically functionally was dead the moment that Jennifer got her hands on him. Chip has just been the ball that Needy and Jennifer have been fighting over, and once he's gone, the two of them can finally direct their energy at each other. Now, as I'm sure you've noticed, I have a fistful of pins, and I'd like to address them. Part 6. What the Sin Man Missed continued. If I had to summarize my issues with Mr. Sinman briefly, it would be condensed into 3 major bad vibes. 1, he's got no sympathy for survivors of trauma. 2, he condescends to women constantly. And 3, he seems confused by gay people as a concept. I think we ought to start with the stuff that is the most difficult to discuss, so we can get that out of the way. The next few minutes, I will be explaining some basic concepts around trauma, abuse, and hypersexuality after sexual assault. Given the implications of this film, I feel it's necessary to provide some emotional context for those who have none, but for those of you who would like to skip this part of the video, I provided the timestamp below. So it's something that I've really yet to explore, but as some of you have absolutely picked up on, this narrative can absolutely be read as the revenge quest of a sexual assault survivor, using the narrative tropes of supernatural possession story to add a darkly comedic tone. Let's talk about what Jennifer's body is really about. On the topmost level, I'd be remiss if I didn't at least briefly talk about the true crime story that could have inspired the events of this film. The case in question was the murder of Elise Pollard, with the motive being the explicit purpose of helping her murderer's band achieve popularity through ritual sacrifice. If you want more information, just search her name. I don't really want to go too heavy into the details, I just wanted to establish this to let you know that I know. But I don't blame you, Mr. Sinman, if you weren't aware of that story. Full disclosure, I actually wasn't aware of that story until my friend Maya told me on June 3rd of 2021. And I'm sure many people watching this film were also unaware of that specific case. But I think way more people were still able to get it, even without that context. See, I do expect you to know a little bit about the sordid history of musicians abusing their fans in other ways. Pick a decade where people like music, and you can guarantee there's some hidden abuse in the industry. Whether absolute power corrupts absolutely, or power reveals the hidden character, we had countless cases where people in power used their power and influence to manipulate the behavior of their fans. I'm sure I don't even need to list examples, that the second I started talking about this, your own examples came to mind. Even if you somehow forget about the history of male manipulator musicians abusing their fans, and just view the inciting incident of this film in the most literal way possible, what you'll find is a scenario where men commit acts of violence against a woman in a way that they would not against another man. In the situation, the woman is overpowered in every way she can be. She is smaller, she is outnumbered, she is inebriated while they are sober, she is bound while they are free, and beyond that, she is a girl in a hick town, while these big city band members are part of a larger world. Throughout the attack, she is dehumanized, treated with scorn when she begs them to stop. She is then overtaken by an outside force against her will. As a result of this, she becomes different and begins to use her body and her sexuality as a way to harm others. You may be confused, Mr. Sinman, as nothing sexual is depicted in the sacrifice, so me making this leap is apropos of nothing. Well, one, allegory doesn't have to be one-to-one for some reasons that we'll get into later, and two, I do feel like there are significant in-text details that let us know that we are meant to view this attack in this way, or rather, to feel it in this way. Now, I'm not just saying this because there is violence and there is a woman. There are plenty of ways to incorporate violence and women into a story that don't have this same effect. Hell, there are scenes with violence and women in this movie that don't have the same effect. But for the inciting incident of this film, the filmmakers drop a lot of hints that draw the line between sexuality and violence. Now you may think, what about how Jennifer behaves when she's possessed? Are you meaning to tell me that this is the behavior of a victim? Shouldn't she be like crying and asking for help? Well, perhaps you expect all survivors to behave the same way, have a recognizable, rational trauma response. Allow me to absolve you of that preconception. Survivors don't always behave the way that you think they ought to. The ways that assault and abuse can cause damage to someone's self-image are immeasurable. And on top of that, the circumstances of every individual's trauma don't always allow for survivors to process their trauma in the most direct or even the most healthy way. This can sometimes result in behavior that's, to the outside, can seem very counterintuitive to the traumatized person, such as today's topic, hypersexuality after sexual assault. It was shortly after rewatching Jennifer's Body for the 1800th time that I was able to pinpoint part of the reason why I was so viciously protective of this movie. To me, it is a film that cares to depict the cycle of self-harm that one can find themselves in following some great self-altering trauma. It's a subject matter that a lot of people already don't want to think about, but I think that learning about this trauma response could help people to be more empathetic and less judgmental. So let's define our terms. Hypersexuality is a form of compulsive sexual behavior which functions very much like an addiction. The defining aspect of this, which separates this from healthy, pleasure-seeking activities, is the purpose that this sex fulfills. It can be for power, to feel wanted, to create emotional distance as a form of self-harm, but typically the person engaging in hypersexual behavior isn't having an overall positive experience. Although the specific details of their trauma vary, there is a common struggle that occurs: a loss of power, which results in a lack of control. And trying to gain control back, compulsive behavior arises. Behavior which the individual will understand to be risky, but will engage in anyways. It can escalate to dangerous levels if this compulsion isn't addressed. It can be a very confusing reaction to the person experiencing it and may cause shame, guilt, dissociation, or further trauma. Let me reiterate for clarity. I am not intending to say that there is a certain amount of promiscuousness that inherently becomes hypersexual. If your normal is once a day, then that is healthy. If your normal is once a year, then that is healthy. However, if you find yourself repeatedly engaging in risky, dangerous behavior, find yourself dissociating during sexual activities, or otherwise putting yourself into situations that evoke a lot of negative feelings, you're not broken, you're not a freak, and you're not alone. I highly encourage you to talk to someone you trust or a professional, if you're able, about these habits. Because regardless what your abuser or your trauma or your mental illness will tell you, you are worthy of love, respect, autonomy, and recovery. But back to Jennifer's Body. You may be thinking, but Jennifer wasn't traumatized, she was killed. To which I would respond, one, that's pretty fucking traumatizing, and two, great trauma can feel like a death. It can feel like you spiritually die. Those around you could feel your loss even while you still breathe. And the cool thing about art is that it can be used to hit on emotional experiences. Just bear with me on this. There was a choice made that 1, Jennifer's sexual history mattered for this ritual, 2, the demon in question was a succubus, as opposed to, I don't know, the demon of music or the demon of waterfalls or anything else, and 3, her feeding behavior mirrors that of a struggling addict with sexual overtones. This is why I'm upset that you didn't get this scene. This is why. The purpose of this scene is explicitly to link sex and violence. It was meant to show us how these two girls have very different ideas of what it means to interact with their sexuality. For Needy, it was a way to connect with somebody. For Jennifer, it is a way of exchanging power and pleasure. In this scene, both women are traumatized and are expressing that trauma in different ways. Needy is unable to connect. Her ability to feel pleasure is shut down as she is overwhelmed by her guilt and grief regarding her inaction the night of the fire. She suffers the way that we expect. She has a panic attack during the event, seeks her mother, curls into a ball and cries on the couch. Jennifer, on the other hand, takes the opportunity to vent some aggression, to express her beliefs that sex is a means to hurt people, a belief which has clearly caused her a lot of pain. Although she is a cannibalistic killer, Jennifer is also critically a victim. This isn't something that the movie forgets about, and I won't either. We can move on a little bit right now. If you're angry about Jennifer's demise, hold on to those feelings. We'll need them later. Now we get to move on to my next piece of criticism for you, Mr. Sin Man. You seem to struggle with the idea that women are people. You do. There are so many sins where the joke is that you just don't get what's going on in different characters' heads, or how, like, you assume things about these characters based purely off of your own expectations of how women be. And it shows, like a lack of imagination, obviously, but also a lack of empathy for women as people, which I find more fucked up. This comes across in how you can't imagine any of these women to have, like, motivation. Also in the way that you constantly condescend to the creators of this movie, facetiously begging them for answers that are present if you took the time to view the film with eyeballs that are not clouded by your own farts. Like this scene. For one, expecting people who've gone through trauma to behave in predictable ways, a losing battle. On top of that, as we've established by now, Jennifer is a master of manipulation, especially when it comes to Needy. She knew that Needy would protect her, but she also knows that Needy is a moral, caring person who would be rightfully put off if she learned that her best friend was eating innocent boys. As for why she's disclosing this information now, one, we know from the last scene that both girls are feeling pretty fragile right now, and it seems like the girls have a history of being the only ones there for each other, so her showing up might be on instinct, on habit. Two, I think it's kind of a test to see how malleable Needy is for Jennifer's desires. If Jennifer was going to have Needy in her life going forward, she would have to tell her eventually, and for them to have an ongoing relationship, Needy would need to be chill with the whole boy eating thing. I don't know, this isn't something that I felt like the filmmakers had to explicitly state, but yeah, evidently for Mr. Sin Man here to fucking believe that women think about things, they need to, like, out loud state all their thoughts, like Cordelia from Buffy the Vampire Slayer. Can you guess? Can you guess what my fucking beef is with this sin? Can you? It's the fact that this is the most wrong thing that you've said. The entire film is dedicated to how Jennifer chooses to process her trauma. She is unable to be honest about what happened to her, for one very obvious reason that I hate to ask, but who was going to believe her? She couldn't have been killed if she's still alive. For all I know, she could have always been like that. Given how quickly after her murder she became a monster, what was to keep the people of her community from going after her? Especially when the people responsible for her attack were only ever becoming more beloved by that same community. Somebody who refuses to think of herself as a victim, trapped in the cognitive dissonance of her new reality, that's the face she's making. This is the face of a woman quietly dissociating, alone with her trauma, and alone with her newfound monstrosity. And you may be thinking, what is this movie about? How teenagers, especially young girls in this new era, don't have support, don't have solidarity with their fellow woman? It's almost like this movie communicates often that the kids aren't alright. Like this thing that you fucking thought was a plot hole, a contrivance, and not a key theme that the film has been trying to demonstrate repeatedly. Remember the "I have a monopoly on pain" line? Did you think the lady filmmakers included it because they had a spare 5 minutes to fill and knew that the audience was really jonesing some child funeral? And yes, I do agree, Mr. Sinman. Like, the way that Jennifer uses her anger and her new power, it is a bit misguided, misdirected. She has the power now where she could literally demolish the people who killed her, but instead she directs that pain and energy into harming people who demonstrably have less power than her. However, I think we'd also be remiss if we didn't acknowledge that she didn't become this person all by herself. Rather, she ended up this way as a result of, say it with me, patriarchy. I'll work on it. Or more specifically, internalized misogyny. We see examples all over this film about how policed women's bodies and choices are. From every inclusion of Chip's younger sister to every passing comment about the leading women's bodies and behaviors, women's bodily autonomy is often disregarded in favor of upholding symbolic aesthetics of womanhood. And in the case of the leading two women, we can see the two dynamic reactions to this gendered, purity-obsessed treatment. At the start of the film, Needy is, on the outside, a very good kid. She's in band, she wears glasses, and we all know what this signifies in media. She's often dressed way more conservatively and in lighter tones to suggest innocence. The way she talks is very restrained, quiet, and more subdued. She's very accommodating to everyone she interacts with. Jennifer, by contrast, is very crass, very outspoken, and very confident. She wears ostentatious outfits that reveal a lot of skin. She is aware that people find her attractive, and she takes power in that fact. She's not afraid to flirt, nor is she afraid to reject potential suitors. She has the vibe of somebody who has been around, learned all the rules of the game, and decided that she would exploit the system. I think often about this line that Jennifer says in this moment, when she compares boobs to weapons. Like many lines in the movies, it's something that took a while to set in. As initially it's comical, then it's gay, and then it's unsettling. No, not the idea of a woman having a weapon. The thought that all of one's body, one's sexuality can be reduced to something that will cause harm. Or I guess something that will prevent me from falling to harm. That is an interesting axis for your world to turn around, is all I'm saying. And I think this line is meant to indicate how Jennifer's view of herself was already warped, even before she was possessed. Now, I absolutely wanted to pay my respects to Jennifer and what she's been through. As a character, she really puts out vibes of hurt people hurt people. Her story is very much a tragedy. But I do need to acknowledge that Jennifer herself is also complicit in the mistreatment of her best friend, as well as others that she victimizes. I think it would be really hypocritical of me not to acknowledge the damage that Jennifer does when her internalized misogyny begins to externalize in deadly ways. That's right, women can cause harm too. And no, it's not just fucking rejecting you. Notice how Jennifer and Chip both tell Needy what she can and can't wear, how much skin to expose, and more critically, in my opinion, notice how Jennifer kills. Notice how she selects her victims. Her first kill is Ahmed, which is more circumstantial, but I think it's worthy to mention that he is one of very few people of color in this movie, and that he is immediately victimized. Now, you could say that this is because of his vulnerable status as an international exchange student. He is not only staying in a country apart from his family, his housemates don't even know that he'd survived the fire. Her second victim, Jonah, was an overweight redhead who was despondent as he grieved his best friend. Her third victim, Colin, she literally says this about.
He's into maggot rock, he wears nail polish. My dick is bigger than his.
So why does she feel the need to emasculate every one of her male victims? Oh wait, hold that thought. You big mad? I haven't forgotten, don't worry. For now, a montage of fucked up things that Jennifer did to Needy that initially read to me as funny, because haha, woman do abuse, how unlikely, and two, haha, woman do abuse to another woman, how gay. When you stop and think about it for a fucking minute, it's just awful. In actuality, that's awful. The way that Jennifer treats Needy is awful. Like, objectively, very unhealthy. One of the most vile parts is the way that Jennifer is absolutely aware of Needy's infatuation with her, her big fat crush, and she uses it to her advantage whenever possible. I suppose, if you're already a casual misogynist to the point of doubting that women have internal worlds, you'd likely also struggle with the idea of two women having a complex interpersonal relationship that doesn't involve a man. You may think that relationships between two women are naturally conflict-free, as a result of all the estrogen that flows between them. However, women are people, and thus the relationships that involve them can be as complex and as messy as relationships with any other genre of person. Which brings me to my final point. This movie's gay as shit. And no, it's not gay in the fun way, where we get to like celebrate it and have pride. It's again highly toxic, but also very grounded. Like, I feel like the situation is one that rings true for a lot of people who have experienced what we're calling het lag. Feelings of attraction, if that's something that you do feel, are already really hard to grasp when they first start happening. And then when you add the complications of those feelings being queer in a distinctly homophobic world, how on earth do you deal with those? And if you're attracted to more than one gender, it can be even more confusing. If you talk to any repressed queer person, I guarantee you that like 3 out of 4 times, you'll hear a story about that one time that they didn't know if they were feeling competitive towards somebody, or intimidated by somebody, or jealous of them, or wanting to jump their bones. See, we live in a society that constantly tells us the right and natural ways to be, which can lead to us simply putting ourselves in the box that's branded as such without really taking the time to explore what that means. That is some repressed gay shit. So, the fun game from earlier for my LGBTQ audience, the answer is in the page. Why hasn't she talked about it? Because this fucking world, especially in horror cinema where she is, hates gay people. Like, in this fucking screenshot, right after she, like, in text admits to being bisexual, she's fucking stabbed. This is a fun nod to the fact that homosexuals get buried in media all the time. Bury your gays, specifically sad sacrificial lesbians, are so common. If you watch my other video about LGBT representation and horror, you know what I'm talking about. There are so many little covert gay moments sprinkled throughout the film, but the moment something like Jennifer's bisexuality is expressly stated, she is stabbed through the gut. Worth mentioning, Needy, who survives, never openly admits, while the camera is out, anything about her attraction to women. It's highly unnecessary in my opinion. Like, I feel like we know that she likes women. I think that's an interesting choice, especially given how the movie opens. And you know what? Let me express. There are parts of the relationship that I do think were genuine and sweet and caring. For instance, I don't doubt that all the time they spent growing up together, bonding over movies like Evil Dead meant nothing. I don't think that the moment where Jennifer spares Needy meant nothing. I don't think that Needy avenging Jennifer's death meant nothing. It just, at the end of the day, is part 7, the ultimate tragedy. Let me make you sad. Imagine, if you will, a different movie with the same premise. 2 girl best friends, some attraction there that's been repressed, go out to a concert on a school night. The satanic band is there. Jennifer still gets murdered. But my big change is that after this, she goes straight to Needy. She does not take any victims. She goes and she asks for help. We get monster friend hijinks as Needy and Jennifer kind of sneak around, trying to hide the transformation, trying to find something that Jennifer can eat without projectile vomiting everywhere. Eventually, as a result of all hijinks, the town does find out, starting with people who also suffered during the fire. And then all the survivors get together and form a support group where they can talk about the ways that that incident affected them, and they can support each other. But no, that's not the story that we got. Instead, the demon that possesses Jennifer forces her down a path that is ultimately self-ruinous. And while it can be read a number of ways, I think that the main barrier between these girls and their happy ending can be summed up at this line right at the end here.
Say I'm better than Needy.
The dominant party, the abuser, always thrives when they can make their victims battle each other. They rely on this, in fact, because in the case that I mentioned where Jennifer teams up with Needy and with Ahmed and with Colin and with Jonas, between a superpowered demon girl, her best friend, an entourage, all assembled to watch her back, do you think that Low Shoulder would stand a chance? Of course not. Instead, hurt people, and the cycle of violence was perpetuated. The final survivor is Needy, and the film is literally her processing her trauma, realizing who was ultimately to blame after countless times having to listen to them brag about how they're still here breathing when so many aren't. The movie ends when Needy finally busts out to hold them accountable. And you know what? That's as good of an ending as the story could have had, given the circumstances. As much justice as you can give to a tragic villainess like Jennifer. Part 8. Final words to Mr. Sinman. So there you have it, Mr. Sinman. The big reason that drove me up the wall that you dodged the point of this movie like fucking Neo is because it was made to deal with you. It was made to address the harm that you cause basically everyone. Your ideas hurt women the most, but they also reinforce harmful behaviors for people of all genders. It's like that song, "You're so vain, you probably think the song is about you," but the opposite. Somebody handed you a shoe, and you put it on your fucking nose just to avoid seeing if it fit. Baffling. Baffling. In some ways, though, isn't it kind of fitting that you had this reaction? I mean, this film, again, is not made for abusers. It was made to bring catharsis through dark comedy to women and LGBT people who know all too well who the real villain of the story is. If anything, this film serves as an excellent litmus test. So if you want to know if someone's cool, I guess what I'm saying is ask them how they feel about this movie. Their answers may just reveal something to you, even if they're not aware of what. Piece of shit. Hello there, thank you for watching. If you're one of my subs who followed for Magnus content, this little announcement is for you. The next video you can expect to see from me will be about John Martin and Basir and Daisy. The more I worked on those scripts individually, the more I realized that they dovetailed into each other nicely, so I'm just going to combine it. For everyone else, going forward, I will expand my scope a bit. I want to talk about all kinds of media, books, podcasts, film, video games, etc. Honestly, I'll look into anything as long as it's a little bit spooky and a little bit gay. Those are my rules. So if that sounds like the kind of content that you'll enjoy, make sure to subscribe so that you know when I drop more content. And feel free to put some recommendations. I'm always looking for more spooky stuff and more gay stuff. And thank you so much to my friend Annie, who generously bankrolled this episode. This is a new thing for me. It's something I don't have a lot of time for right now, but I would love to make time for going forward. But until then, if you'd like to send me some support, you can tip me over on Coffee. If not, the mere eyeballs that you have lent me for this time period means so much, and I'm very grateful. Once again, thank you for watching, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.